My name is Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's my first time in Brazil, so I'm super excited.
The world is one big data problem. And if you're a data person, which I hope all of us are by the end of tonight, if you're a data person, you begin to see data everywhere. You begin to see the role that data can play in everything that we do. And you start to understand what Andrew is getting at with this quote. Really, what we're finding is that data is changing our entire world. It's changing the way that we get around, the way that we transport ourselves, the way that we transport goods. It's changing the way that we create and consume entertainment. I mean, literally, you have companies like Netflix and Amazon using data to determine what shows they're going to make and what movies they're going to produce. It's changing the way that we run political campaigns. It's changing how politicians are interacting with the public. There are groups all around the world that are using data to resist authoritarian regimes and to hold government accountable. We're seeing data affect all parts of our lives. It's even helping us pursue healthy living. We're strapping things to our wrists to track how many steps we take in a day and where our heart rate is while we exercise. Data is beginning to influence all aspects of our lives. And even more change is coming. We're beginning to see things on the horizon that are going to change our lives in ways that we probably don't even understand right now. We're seeing the advent of autonomous vehicles, driverless cars. We're seeing the cashierless store. I don't know if you've heard about this, but Amazon actually is testing a store in Seattle near their office where there's no cashiers. You just walk in and it's attached to your Amazon account, you grab stuff, and you just walk out. And data and technology is underlying that entire experience. We're able to do things with data that were not possible even 5 or 10 years ago. We're also seeing cities change. So the way that we interact with government and our local government in particular. I do a lot of work with cities around the world, helping them think about how data and technology can help them deliver better services to their citizens. And what we're seeing is this rise of the Internet of Things. The company that I'm a part of, Uptake, this is kind of our bread and butter. This is the work that we do, is dealing with the Internet of Things. And every year, we're adding billions and billions and billions of devices to the Internet. And all of these devices are collecting data. We have washers and dryers that are now connected to the internet, refrigerators that are connected to the internet, our phones, our computers, our cars, all of these things are being connected to the internet and are generating vast amounts of data. I mean, with every person in this room, there are literally tens of thousands of data points that you put out every year about yourself, your location, your thoughts, your feelings, your pictures, the places that you've been, the things that you've done. And all of this data is being used because we have this kind of transaction with many of the people that create the services that we use every day. John, who's the founder of Wired Magazine, said, oftentimes we happily give groups like Facebook terabytes of data about ourselves, because we're content with the implicit trade-off that Facebook is giving us some sort of service that makes our lives better. We do this with our internet providers and the services that we use. And increasingly, we're doing this with things that we don't even realize that we're giving up. Right? When John gave this quote, it was fairly obvious that when we used Facebook, there was an inherent transaction taking place. I pay for Facebook with my data, essentially. And now, though, as we start to have more connected to devices and attach more things to the internet, it's less clear all of the times that we're making this trade-off and actually giving people our data without realizing it. But all of this data that we generate, all of the data that we create about ourselves, what's it oftentimes used for? It's oftentimes used to help us find dates, order food, get around. It's like we've focused so much of our technological energy on solving the problems of the privileged. We have so many companies that are coming out of places like Silicon Valley and even my hometown of Chicago that focus on the problems of a fairly small segment of the world's population. And the question is, can data and technology be used for more? Can it be used for more than just helping us find dates and get food and press juices together? And the answer is absolutely yes. Data and technology can be a tremendous force for good in the world. I've worked on projects where we're using connected devices to monitor water quality and distribution of water to rural parts of Africa. I've worked on projects where we're using drones to combat poaching in parts of Southeast Asia and South Africa. We've done a ton of work around education. We're using predictive analytics to better understand which students are at risk of dropping out of high school or college so we can intervene and help them get there. Data can be a tremendous force for good in our world. And there's a few different ways that data is typically used within what I would call the data for good movement. The first is the smarter targeting of services. What I mean by this is that many people that run social enterprises or nonprofit organizations or philanthropically minded organizations, we kind of assume that our programs work the same on everyone. Right? We assume that people in need, they enroll in our program and we can do something to make their life better. But the truth is that most programs don't work the same on everyone. Most interventions, most organizations aren't equally effective on every person. And so it raises this question, can we better understand where our organizations do the most good and who they do the most good for? And if we can begin to do that, we can begin to target our organizations and our services on the people and the places where they're going to do the most good. Because every time that we deliver services to somebody that we don't benefit, we need to ask ourselves, was that a waste of resources or not? Because I believe that all of us here, we're here in this room because there's something about the world as it is today that we want to see changed for tomorrow. And we have a limited number of resources, a limited amount of resources to accomplish that with. So we need to be as effective as possible. We need to be as focused as we possibly can. And so part of the work that the Data for Good movement has been doing is helping organizations better target their work, better identify and find the people that would benefit from their organizations and target their services towards them. It also allows us to do easier monitoring of our organizations. The old model was we'd run a program in some far-off place of the world, and maybe every 5 years we would do a randomized control trial or a monitoring and evaluation project. But because of technology, we're able to better monitor the work on the ground. I've done a tremendous amount of work in agriculture, helping understand how different interventions are helping small farmers improve their crop yields. And this is something we can now manage from anywhere in the world because we're able to look at daily satellite imagery of places in the world that we never used to have that kind of information for. So it's allowing us to better monitor the work that we're doing. It's also allowing us to do faster and cheaper evaluations. Again, the old model was every 5-10 years, let's run some big, expensive experiment and randomized control trial and spend a lot of money to do it. And typically these kinds of experiments took years and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And now using new machine learning techniques and new data science methods, we can better estimate how well and evaluate how well our organizations are doing. It also leads to better service coordination. What I mean by this is that there's lots of organizations that are essentially doing the same work. There's lots of us that are trying to solve the same problems, and sometimes even in the same communities. And yet we rarely talk to one another. We rarely share information with one another. And so part of the work that I'm a part of through a company I founded called Bright Hive is actually helping organizations share data so they can understand what's working and what's not. We'll go in and we'll work with all of the homeless organizations in a community and help them understand who is serving which kinds of populations most effectively, helping them better coordinate their services. Because, again, at the end of the day, we're all here because there's something about the world as it is today that we want to see changed for tomorrow. And if we can find ways to partner and collaborate and better coordinate our services, I think we can get there faster. But in any project, there's a few pitfalls to avoid. Because I sometimes will talk to groups like this and they get excited about the possibilities of data. They say, Andrew, we want to coordinate, we want to evaluate, we want to do all this kind of stuff. We're going to dive right in. And I always say there's a few things that you want to make sure that you avoid. The first is this, like what I call tech utopianism. Like, I am unabashedly a tech guy. Like, I am going to get the new phones and the new TVs and the gadgets that you go into my apartment and like you can talk to almost anything in my apartment. Right? I wake up in the morning, I'm like, lights turn on, and it's like you're God in my own little apartment. But it's easy then to fall prey to this kind of idea that technology will save us. Technology will not save us. Technology will not solve the problems that you care about. You will. You will. We need to be very careful about recognizing that technology is not the escape. It's a tool that we can use when appropriate. And sometimes technology isn't the right tool to use. So we need to be sure that we avoid this idea that technology can save us. The second thing is overbuilding. Are there any coders, developers, data scientists, people in the room? We love overcomplicating things. What I mean by that is, if you give me like a little problem, I am going to try and find the most complicated way to solve that problem, to show you how smart I am. And this is a huge problem among some tech companies that I work with. I'll sometimes get volunteers or people from various tech companies to work on projects, and there's this temptation to kind of throw everything possible at the problem. And that's not helpful. You need to take a user-centered approach. You need to think about what is going to be most beneficial to the people on the ground. And oftentimes it's a very simple solution, not a very complicated one. And so we need to watch out to ensure that we're not overbuilding. The third thing is building in isolation. And what I mean by this, and I will say, like, us in the United States, we do this really well. We sit in our desks and cubicles in Silicon Valley or whatever, and we say, oh, I can solve the problems of Africa. I've never been, but I got it. And it's this idea, again, that somehow we're smarter, we're better than the people that we're trying to serve, and that's absolutely not true. And so we need to make sure that when you're developing and utilizing data or technology in your work, that you don't do it in isolation, that you do it collaboratively with the people that you're trying to serve. I cannot tell you how amazing it is to sit down with the people that you're trying to serve and collaboratively come up with solutions together. That is the way that I love seeing technology developed in this space. I was just a couple of weeks ago in Nepal. I'm doing some work for the Uptake Foundation, which I lead. We're investing around stopping human trafficking on the border of Nepal and India. And we went and we spent a week just sitting with the people. We're building a mobile application to help them track data well and to get insights into the patterns of the people that they're rescuing, the lives that they're saving. And we literally just spent a week with them, sitting in, dirt floors, like helping us understand what they needed. We cannot think that we can build the things in isolation from the people that we exist to serve. And then lastly, this idea of developing new walled gardens. I think the future is open. The future is interoperable. The future is when technology doesn't say you have to join my platform and be locked into it. This week is actually International Open Access Week. And people are celebrating this idea of open data and open technology. And I think that is very much the future, especially the future of social good technology. So what then does make a data for good project successful? The first thing is empathy. We need to have empathy for the people that we exist to serve. It's easy when you have a computer screen between you and the people that you're trying to serve, you and the problems that you're working on, to lose some of that empathy. We need to begin all of our work with a deep empathy and respect for the people that we're working with. And this kind of leads us into a user-centered design perspective. We need to think about, what does this person actually need? So many third sector, social sector organizations operate under a series of constraints that most people in the private sector don't understand. And so we need to take a user-centered approach. We need to understand what will work for you in this environment. That leads to success. The next one is being focused on impact. We need to be hyper-focused on why we exist. There's been a lot of talk over the last several years of what it means to be an impactful organization. I like to think of it this way. If you're trying to conceptualize what the impact of your organization is, imagine two worlds. In one world, your organization exists, and in one world, everything is the same, but your organization doesn't exist. The difference between these two worlds is your organization's impact. The difference between these two worlds is your organization's impact. And what I mean, what that hopefully helps to elicit, is this idea that we need to be hyper-concerned about what would have happened anyway. This idea that the fancy way to call it is a counterfactual. What would have happened anyway? So if you're working with students and you're trying to keep them out of prison, and you succeed at that, and you succeed at helping these young people stay out of prison for some period of time, does that mean that your organization was impactful? Not necessarily. None of those kids might have gone to prison anyway. Or if you're working to help people get jobs and you're successful at getting some people jobs, were you impactful? Not necessarily. Because some of those people might have gotten jobs anyway. So you need to be very concerned about what it is, what's called like the marginal impact of our organizations. Who are the people that we're helping over the line? Who are the people whose lives are changed because they're part of our organization? That is why we need to remain focused on impact. I oftentimes like to talk about the difference between the world as it is today and the world as I think it can be. And I think it begins with this idea of impact. Today, many of our organizations, many of the organizations in the third sector are super busy doing lots of things, right? We're very good as a sector at keeping really busy, at raising money to start new programs and at delivering programs and all of this kind of stuff. But it can sometimes distract us from why we really exist, which is to create change. So we need to remain hyper-focused on this change. And part of the problem is that today, there's actually not a ton of incentive to switch to impact, right? We're actually, if you run a nonprofit organization, most of the time you're getting grants to run programs, to keep busy, to do things. You're not actually getting paid for the change that you're creating. And so it can become very easy to become distracted and to start keeping really, really busy and start not remaining so rigorously focused on the impact that you're creating. And so my vision for the future is one in which we are rigorously focused on impact. The work that we are doing, the work that you are doing in this room is some of the most important in the world. It is some of the most valuable in the world. We are creating real value. We are changing people's lives. We are solving problems. We need to remain hyper-focused on that. The second thing is where technology becomes a tool and an asset, not a burden. I spend a lot of time with nonprofits, and I'll sometimes go into the organization, I'll go meet with frontline staff, because you never trust the directors and the managers. They don't know what's going on. You have to go to the frontline staff. And you sit down with them and you ask them like, I heard that they unrolled some new mobile application for you to use last year. How's that going? And you'll find out the truth, right? You'll hear people say, that's great, but every Friday, I just kind of put in a bunch of numbers that I think are right, but I don't know. I don't really keep track. And you begin to understand that so oftentimes technology is burdensome to the people that are actually doing the work, the people that are actually delivering services. And so part of why I do this, part of what I'm trying to work for, is a world in which technology is a tool and an asset, not a burden, in particular on those that are doing the work. And I'm doing a workshop tomorrow, and we're going to dive a lot more into that topic. Next is this a sector, a place where all kinds of skills are used to solve our most valuable problems. I think for too long, this third sector was dominated by social workers and people with a certain skill set who are absolutely valuable. But I'm excited to see groups like this that are coming together to talk about the role of technology and data to solve some of these problems as well. There's a whole variety of skills, of people that we need at the table if we're going to make progress on the things that we care most about. So that's a little bit about my vision for the future. And as, this is my favorite quote, I have to end the talk with this, as Edward Deming, the famous statistician, said, "In God we trust, but all others must bring data." Thank you guys so much for having me.
Eu vejo como setor privado, eu vejo o terceiro setor ainda carente de saber estruturar as informações e saber medir o impacto das próprias ações. Você acha que quanto mais o terceiro setor olhar para Big Data e para a análise das informações, a captação vai aumentar?
So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us when it comes to helping organizations do a better job of collecting data to talk about their impact. That's one of the biggest reasons that organizations approach us is because they're wanting to capture their impact and communicate that mostly to donors or to corporations that are supporting them, foundations, things like that. But one of the interesting, and I think this is a very important aspect of data, is how it helps us prove and improve the impact that we're having. One of the interesting things we were talking about a little bit earlier is that as parts of the social sector start to measure themselves more rigorously, they're actually able to get more money to come into the sector. I've seen this a few different times, and it's a pattern that we're beginning to pick up on as things like healthcare, energy efficiency in particular, started to become more measurable. And as organizations started doing this not just in isolation, but actually collaboratively doing some of this evaluation, new financing opened up. Because donors, people with money, want to know that their money is going to do the most good. And if you give them data and information about that, they become more confident. They become more confident in what their donation and their investment is getting them. And so if you can, as parts of the sector have become more rigorous, I absolutely have seen them actually have new types of financing, more financing come in. And I've even seen individual organizations, when they are really rigorous and transparent about their data and their impacts, donors are drawn to that because it gives them more confidence in what they're getting.
Vou agora passar para a plateia. A pergunta da Bruna, de Florianópolis. Como usar os dados de maneira mais criativa? Tem alguns exemplos?
Yeah, so data and creativity. So I think there is this thought that somehow data scientists aren't necessarily the most creative people in the world. But I will say that many have come from music backgrounds, artistic backgrounds. I'm actually really always impressed by how many people have that kind of background. And creativity is a big part of data science. If you don't bring creativity to the work, you're not going to get that much value. In the workshop, I'll talk some more about this tomorrow, but a huge part of the data science work is around what's called data engineering, trying to figure out what features and data am I going to include in my work. And you can get really creative with this process, and some of the best data scientists are really creative at that aspect of the process. The second kind of aspect of creativity I'll speak to is the use of things like data visualization and data storytelling. I actually briefly held the role of data storyteller at Groupon, and my job was to figure out how can we use data to tell the stories of our work and the work of our partners. And so there's a lot of ways that narrative and data can actually come together to tell a cohesive and compelling story.
Obrigada. Mais uma da plateia. Como negócios, empresas lucrativas, também podem utilizar dados para gerar impacto social como atividade principal? Do Diogo, de São Paulo, da Artemisia.
So can companies also use data to generate social impact? Absolutely. We're seeing the emergence of something called data philanthropy right now, where companies are actually thinking of ways that they can give away their data in much the same way that they might give away their time or their money. Data is a resource. It's an asset. And it's one that oftentimes private companies have very valuable data to social third sector organizations. And so we're seeing the emergence of them trying to find ways to philanthropically partner with organizations to make their data accessible. So that's kind of like the emergence of the data philanthropy movement. And then also, as parts of the sector become more measurable, I mean, it does actually induce private sector investment in some new ways, where you're seeing companies actually co-founded a social enterprise that does energy efficiency monitoring. And it's a for-profit company with investors, and you know, we're going after it. But it's achieving a social goal. And the reason we're able to create a sustainable business is because we're actually capturing the value that's being created. We're measuring it and we're talking about it. And so there's a ton of opportunity both for established companies to find ways to philanthropically give away their data, and then for new emerging companies to structure themselves around opportunities to use data for social good.
Agora, para uma pequena ONG ou segundo setor, terceiro setor, qual é primeiro passo? O que você recomenda como primeiro passo para ir nessa direção de uso de dados e tecnologia?
So the first step is almost never technical. It's please don't leave here and go hire a data person at your organization. That's not going to be the solution most of the time. It's almost trying to think about, like, what's the culture of your organization, and are there ways to slowly begin to change the culture? Because organizations of all sizes can use data. I don't care how small you are or how big you are, you can think in terms of evidence for the decisions that you make. Why do you make the decision that you do? Do you have evidence for making that decision? Do you have evidence for doing things the way that you're doing them? Really, evidence is just another word for data. And so organizations of all sizes can think rigorously about the decisions that they make. And I oftentimes see, especially in smaller third sector organizations, the best investment you can make early on is one that's just in culture. And saying, hey, when we have a meeting, we're not going to just do things, we're not just going to come to the decision we did last year because that's what we did last year. We're going to try and use evidence to say, is this the best possible way to do what we're trying to do? Is there evidence to support the decisions that we're making? And once you kind of begin to develop this more evidence-based culture, data will naturally follow. You'll naturally start to make investments in the technology and in the people that will help you get better evidence, because now you're hungry for it. Now you want more evidence. But you can never force an organization to become data-driven. They have to want it, and that's almost always begins with cultural investments instead of technological ones.
Tem uma pergunta que é até polêmica, bem interessante, e que eu vou ler em inglês. How about our virtual identity that is out of our control and centralized in just a few companies that use it in an unknown way at the offline world? How to change the power we have about the use and portability of it?
Ah, yes. So the problem that essentially Facebook is a country that no one is elected is a problem. Yes, absolutely. The vast majority, or a large majority of the data that you create is controlled and owned by a few companies. If you use, like I have a Google phone, I use Google Calendar and email and all of that for everything that I do. They know a lot about me. And it's kind of the Wild West in one sense of what they're choosing to do with that information, how they might be choosing to protect that information, how they might be choosing to utilize that information. Just this week, I have a friend, a colleague who is soliciting feedback from people who feel, and this is unconfirmed, but who feel that like Facebook and Instagram are listening to them. Like they say something and then the ads just appear, right? And I don't think that's actually happening. I want to be very clear. But we're getting to this kind of creepy world where people might know things about you, companies might know things about you before you know them about yourselves. There's a great story from the US of Target, this large retail chain in the US. They send like flyers to people, and they sent one to a teenage girl basically saying, with a bunch of like baby items. like diapers and all this kind of stuff. And the dad sees this in the mail, goes to his Target and is like, why are you sending my daughter things for, baby items? And they were essentially like, well, our algorithm said she was pregnant. And turns out she was pregnant, and the dad didn't know, and this is how the news got broke. And so we're in this world where it's amazing what some of these companies are able to do. And we often don't realize how many companies sell and transact on our data. There are entire businesses set up basically to just collect all of this data from lots of different sources and sell it for various uses. Right now in the US, we're caught in a big debate and scandal about Oxford Analytica, which was a firm that President Trump used to help get elected in a somewhat maybe illegal fashion. But they collect all this information from lots of different sources and then use it to target political ads in very, very tight races. And that might not be a use case that we're okay with. So what we need to do is we need to become more educated about how data is being used, where we're choosing to give our data without realizing it, where we're allowing companies to have our data. Like even decisions about what types of services that you choose to use online can make a big difference. There are some that are much safer and more encrypted and all kinds of things. And so we need to become aware, because I absolutely do believe that while data can be a tremendous source for good in the world, it raises risks as well. It's like any tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for harm. And we need to become pretty wise about the ways that it can be used for harm.
Gente, tem muita pergunta aqui, eu vou tentar fazer todas. Não sei se vou conseguir aqui pelo tempo. Falando em dados, utilização de dados de forma positiva, o Maurício, aqui de Florianópolis, pergunta: como dados e tecnologia podem ajudar a impactar de forma positiva o problema de aglomerados urbanos subnormais, favelas, como questões de habitação e acesso à cidade e infraestrutura básica, e dentro de realidades como a do Brasil ou outros países emergentes?
So data can be a tremendous asset in helping us better maintain and deliver infrastructure. In particular, I'll start there. One of the things that I do at Uptake is that we actually work with cities to better maintain core infrastructure, things like water and transit and power, like some of these kind of core pieces of infrastructure. Data and technology can actually help maintain for longer, ensure that it's working more efficiently. That is very much a big part of what we do at Uptake, is work with all kinds of players to maintain their equipment. But when it also comes to issues of more human rights and social service delivery, data can absolutely play a role. Again, it can help us know which organizations working in these communities are most effective, but it can also just give the community a voice. I've done a bunch of work with an organization called Slum Dwellers International, which is a fantastic organization based out of South Africa with a large office in India. They work all over the world, literally just going into informal communities and doing like a census, collecting information, and taking that from the community to local government representatives and saying, this is what the community wants. This is who the community is. It's time for, again, for people to have a voice in choosing what services they're going to get. And so data has played a tremendous role in that, with that organization in particular.
Acho que dá tempo de fazer mais uma ou duas perguntas. Vou ler essa da Rafaela, aqui daqui de Florianópolis também. Ela está lendo um livro chamado Abundância, um dos autores da Singularity University, uma instituição dedicada à tecnologia e inovação. O livro fala sobre como o mundo de abundância é possível a partir de várias intervenções tecnológicas. Qual a sua visão sobre outras tecnologias que não Big Data? De que forma elas podem trazer impacto?
So I think technology in general can be hugely impactful for the world. We're seeing the way that we grow food and deliver food, for example, begin to change. We're seeing investments in vertical and urban farming in a way that we didn't a few years ago. We're seeing huge disruptions though as well. I mean, technology, again, it's I like to think of it as a tool that can be used for good or sometimes for harm, and we have to be concerned too about some of the disruptions that technology is causing. In the U.S., one of the things we talk a lot about is autonomous vehicles. There's a huge number of people that make their living driving trucks around the United States that very well could have their jobs displaced in a relatively short amount of time. I also think technology can come in and provide lots of opportunities for those people and help us, innovate and create jobs out of that. So there's, some of the technologies that people are talking a lot about. So we are hearing a lot more about agriculture. We're hearing a lot more about in the medical community changing the way that medicine's actually delivered, actually using things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're seeing drone technology have actually a lot of applications around the world and how it's improving medical delivery, agriculture, monitoring of assets like mines and construction sites. So there's a ton of opportunity for technologies of all kinds. I run this thing called the Good Tech Fest in Chicago, in the United States. We're actually doing it in Detroit next year. And it's really it's trying to be that place where it's saying, look, what are the technologies that are out there and how can they be utilized for social good?
Uma última pergunta, a gente infelizmente já estourou o tempo. Eu queria pegar uma palavra do que você usou da tua apresentação, que eu acho importantíssima, e eu acho que a gente devia prestar cada vez mais atenção nisso, que é empatia. Dá um exemplo de empatia que aconteceu com você, na tua vida, na tua experiência pelo mundo.
So for me, I like to think back to when did I kind of go on this journey? I think for many of us in this room, there was a moment where something became dissonant. And we were like, this is the direction my life's going to go. I can't sit by and let this continue to happen. And so for me, that moment actually came, I was 13. And I was 14. It was the summer of 1999, and I was in South Africa. I spent that summer teaching English in some rural schools between Johannesburg and Durban, South Africa. And when we weren't teaching, we weren't in these schools, we'd spend time out in the villages where the kids we were working at lived. And in 1999, South Africa was being ravaged by AIDS. It's being ravaged by people were dying left and right of AIDS. And I met kids my own age, maybe a couple years older, maybe a couple years younger, who had lost their families, who had lost their parents, who had lost siblings to the disease. And I was this kid. I was 14 years old. I had a nice big house in suburban Connecticut in the United States, and nothing was further from my lived experience at that point. And for me, that was the moment where it was like, okay, I can't sit by and do nothing. And that I think that seed of empathy was planted.
Muito obrigada.